welcome back to the broadcast center powered by SAP Ariba here at the World Procurement Congress. There's an amazing buzz out there that we can see and we can hear, and it's a fantastic event. And joined by Nandini from Procurement Leaders and also from Barbara from SAP. And we're going to just talk about just some things that I think are happening and are interesting in procurement. I was reading a change book by Clayton Christensen. There was a really good quote there around we overestimate the amount of change in the next 2 years, and we underestimate the change over the next 10 years. Procurement's all about change. We're seeing this all the time. The context of procurement, the context of AI, the context of technology, what do you think the sort of changes are that we're going to be seeing over the next 5 or 10 years? Nandini, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. I think in 10 years from now, a decade from now, we're not going to feel like this is something new. And I feel very optimistic that we will be able to use AI in a way that solves some of the world's unprecedented problems. You think about, scope 3, inclusion, but we have to get through the hard stuff. We have to be able to use it responsibly. We have to really make it versatile, but it's really interesting, even when I think about STEM in schools. They're saying, actually, push the kids towards humanities. You probably want to, read texts in their original language and things like that. So I feel I agree that we might overthink what we need to do in the next 2 years, because I think this is coming. We're going to have to go with it, and we need to get comfortable with language, use cases, and being comfortable in AI. What do you think?
Well, I think, it's interesting. I mean, people discuss, and I think Simon Sinek mentions the law of diffusion of innovation, right? Of it, you will at some point hit a tipping point, right? But there needs to be enough early adoption for that tipping point to take place. So everyone's looking at these technologies and they're excited by it, and they're also scared by it to some extent, and they're like, how is this going to change our world? But it's likely that it probably won't change anything in the next 1 to 2 years. You just sort of see the potential. But with time, as the adoption of the capabilities increase, as we figure out how to responsibly and ethically adopt AI, which is a whole nother, the technological capabilities aside, those are some very serious questions that need to be figured out and answered. Once they get figured out and sorted, I think we'll really end up seeing in that 5 to 10 year horizon the change take place. The internet itself was no different. It launched in the early 90s or so, right? But it wasn't until the mid 2000s where you really started seeing the profound impact that it was having. So I think organizations need to look at it with that lens. The potential is remarkable. What it can do is inspiring in many ways, but the change horizon you have to be planning for is probably that 5 to 10 years. And it's, the change horizon has to be planned for with a people impact in mind just as much as a digital impact in mind, which isn't always necessarily obvious.
I think it's going to be interesting to see, is it going to be an operating method, or is it going to be an application? Is it going to be something that's going to be there without us knowing about it and just the way it transacts? Or are we going to physically know that these things are happening? I think that's going to be an interesting
That's so interesting, Gordon, because we can see from the member community and ecosystem how intentional procurement leaders want to be about it. So you have some senior teams forcing their leadership teams to really engage and go through some sort of basic AI 101. And then you have other teams saying, actually, we want to nail 1 or 2 cases. And then you've got others who are like, we're actually very far away from this, but our executive team, our CEO and board have an ambition for us, which is to kind of leapfrog this thing, to Barbara's point. So I think it's really interesting to actually strategically think through, it's coming, as Barbara says, where do you want to be intentional about it, in your roadmap? Yeah.
Well, maybe we can build on that a little and talk about, so we conduct a piece of research every year with The Economist. This year is 2,300 responses from C-suite, which is pretty impressive. And we asked the question around, so what's the top strategic priority for procurement for the next 12 to 18 months? And pretty much universally, 57% came back, and it was the top answer for every persona, the top answer for every country, top answer for every industry, and it said digitalization. So I guess my question, and maybe we start with you, Barbara, this one is, why do you think that is? And what is it, do you think, that leaders in procurement should prepare for, because this is such an important strategic priority?
It's one of the pathways that you mentioned this morning, Nandini, isn't it, right? So it's resonating from every perspective. I mean, I think the power of technology can be seen everywhere around us. And I think even as consumers, we know that the impact technology has had on our lives. And I think we get puzzled as individuals when we go to our corporate jobs and think that the impact is lacking, right? I mean, and we speak about it in terms of the challenges that we're facing. Now, of course, the dynamics are very different in a business-to-business environment as compared to a business-to-consumer environment. But at the same time, we realize and we all laugh and joke at the fact that, I was searching for this and now I'm getting ads about this thing all the time, right? It's sort of
it's listening to
it's
you.
listening to me, but oh my God, I can't run a spend analytics report to save my life, right? So I think, culturally, we see this dichotomy, right, where the power of data and the power of artificial intelligence, in some sense, is ubiquitous, but in another sense is also inaccessible when we look about it in the context of, corporate business. And there's good reasons for that, privacy, security, et cetera, some very, very good reasons for that. But at the same time, organizations want to challenge the norm and the bureaucracy that has existed that prevents those technologies from being accessible, and want to bring the productivity and the efficiency benefits to life. So I think that's the underlying cause for why people know it's possible, they experience it in their daily lives, and they're like, let's make it possible in business. And when we make it possible in business, and companies like SAP, right, support them in doing that, they can then really realize the benefits that they can achieve in the workplace. I think that's one of the factors that's driving digitalization, across the board, from, make things that I do still that are analog and paper-based, make them digital, and then also the adoption of the more sophisticated technologies that we see around us.
Nandini, are you seeing something, talking to the procurement leaders community around this, as Barbara said, and you said earlier, it's one of the 5 glide paths. What are you seeing?
I think that second point that you made, Barbara, around, when you talk to organizations and their procurement teams, a lot of digitalization efforts, there's still the word pilots is attached to it. Yeah, and you're like, seriously? When are we going to be mainframe? When is this going to be, scale up, standard? So, I think there were distractions, of course, with the pandemic and so on and so forth. And now, as you think about advanced technology, I think you're spot on. Work life has to match the ubiquitousness of technology in our personal lives. But I think procurement teams are really thinking, when I think of talent and innovation and sustainability and operating models and risk, we got to digitalize these processes, and we probably still have much to do. We've had some ambitions and we haven't fulfilled them yet. Those pilots need to now be scaled.
Yeah, and I think it's as well as digitalizing their process, maybe even reimagining their processes for a digital world, I think. Correct. As well, because Correct. Digitalizing manual process is still a manual process, isn't it? You're not going to get the value. Yeah. It's not going to necessarily deliver. Yeah, and interesting, you mentioned there about we've been distracted. There's been a number of distractions. There's been a number of crises, and potentially more on the horizon. And there's certainly enough research that says that the frequency is increasing, the longevity is increasing. JFK once said that crisis presents a choice. So, in the subject of crisis and disruption, what do you think procurement's going to choose to be over the next 3 to 5 years, looking at this constant state of disruption and crisis?
I think it's going to have to be really comfortable with mega flux, perma change. It's not one crisis. It's, perma crisis, I understand, is now a word in our dictionaries and lexicon, and it's kind of relative. Like you speak to, you've got, you look in Europe where we are today, and you got the whole caboodle, right? Inflation, disruption, shipping, Suez, 2 wars, and you actually don't know when any of these things are going to end. So I think you have to be very clear and resolute on what your design principles are, what is your strategy and focus. A little bit like, you can only do so much. You can't really say, hey, What will the U.S. election, you can plan, but you have to have a pretty, I think, clear view, much like what Thomas said and The Economist this morning said, which was just literally, what can you control? How are you planning for your, time horizons, whatever they happen to be, and really engage in the ecosystem, which is expanding. I mean, we're being asked to solve the planet's biggest issues: Scope 3, UN goals, GHG emissions. We're going to have to do that despite the crises, and so we're going to need a plan that leapfrogs all of that.
Yeah, Barbara, what are you thinking about this?
I think it's a very interesting, as you said, perma-crisis, Nandini, and I think there's two things I would say about that. I think procurement has shown that it can very effectively deal with crises, right? I think the adaptability quotient for procurement organizations is very high. And I think, you refer to them as superheroes. I think at Spend Connect Live, we've referred to them as, it's really true, right? I think, the pandemic and the supply chain challenges that came with that and the inflation challenges of the past couple of years have shown that procurement can pivot effectively. And I think the challenge is that the only way to deal with the situation is that the teams need to constantly be in this mode. So it's sort of, if I use a basketball analogy, when they do an all-court press or a full-court press, right, which is that you're really aggressively playing defense, it's a very effective tactic, but the team gets very tired very quickly when they're always in that mode. So I think what leaders should do is they realize that, to some extent, we have to normalize this idea of being in a full court press, but then how are you taking care of the people at the same time? The other very powerful stat from The Economist, and it's been, people have been speaking about this now for several years, is that the population is aging, the population is also declining, so the workforce is, retiring, and then not enough people are necessarily coming in to fill the gap. And those people that are there, especially with some of the fears around AI and how to be doing it, you have to take care of your people. I think that's the one thing that I cannot stress. You can, take the learnings from the pandemic, make them as permanent as possible, but don't forget that there needs to be a very robust people strategy associated with it so that you can deal with it. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult.
So people adapt. I love the adaptability quotient that I've heard a couple of times. I think that's a great phrase. Resilience. Agility.
Future-proofing.
The planning is going to be key.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Procurement. I kind of, the pandemic was 4 years ago, so I don't want to dwell on it. But you're absolutely right, Barbara, that it benefited this function, no doubt, because, senior executives were like, where's my stuff? Can you procure this? Can you get that? Can we pivot? In the short time that I've been with the function, from, wanting a seat at the table, it was in the boardroom every week. So that was terrific. And you're absolutely right. To now future-proof on two dimensions, the generation that grew up and are now CPOs, they need to get ready for the next generation coming in, And then we've got some huge, goals to hit in terms of sustainability, to your point. There's a lot that's flux, but having that game plan, future-proofing organizations, I think that's in the gamut of this function.
Well, I think we could I could personally carry on talking for the rest of the day. But Nandini, Barbara, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And I look forward to chatting to you all again soon.